Most people buy Bitcoin to retire before they are 65, but my guest bought it to fund his lifestyle until he's 200 years old. Gary Leland is not your average boomer. He's a serial builder who started a business empire with only $10 in his pocket and is now biohacking his way toward a 200-year lifespan. In this conversation, we bridge the gap between the boomer work ethic and the millennials' need for a future that doesn't feel rigged, and why Gary believes that the current separation in our society is a fundamental problem that needs to be fixed. All right, let's dive in. Gary Leland, welcome to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Hey, excited to do millennials. You know, both my daughters, born in 86 and 87, are millennials, so I figure maybe I can send this to them, and they might go, "Hey, Dad knows his stuff."
Well, I hope so. Let's see where we go. I think you have a very interesting story, and like your friends Larry Lepard and Bob Burnett, I think it is actually very cool to see boomers being into Bitcoin. I think we'll talk about that. But you grew up and had the opportunity to use money that wasn't debased to a certain degree, acquire assets, etc. Right, and so I think it's very interesting that people in your age range get Bitcoin, because it takes quite some unlearning to actually see Bitcoin, I think, right? And so I'm excited to talk today, but I actually wanted to start with a different topic. You are very much into longevity. You've set a goal of living to 200 years old.
I want to be the first person to live to 200.
That would be cool. But you would actually see the last Bitcoin being mined in 2140. How does having a very, very long time preference actually change how you look at stacking Bitcoin versus, let's say, a typical investor who just looks at his stock portfolio on a way, way shorter time range?
And I think that's a really good question. You know, many people that I talk to or know are stacking their Bitcoin because they're smart, first of all, like you and I. But they're thinking of the goal when they think of long term. They're thinking, okay, I can leave this generational wealth to my kids instead of having the usage of the generational wealth. Where I'm the opposite, I want to live to 200, so I'm going to be using a lot of my generational wealth. But I'm sure with what I think will happen with Bitcoin, they'll get their share of it, in other words. But I think that's one of the reasons I am on the what I call the 200-year life project, trying to live to 200, because of the fact I realize what the long-term play is here. I think I told this to someone one time, and they really kind of argued it with me, but I believe I'm right. If I was like a coal miner mining coal for 12 hours a day, nothing against coal miners, that's not my point here. But if I was doing that kind of work for 200 years, I don't know if I'd want to do that for 200. I have a lot of people say, I don't want to work till I'm 200 when I tell them that. That's one of the objections they get. And that would be an example of maybe something you don't want to do for 200 years to exist. But I believe with Bitcoin and the long-term play on Bitcoin, that I will be able to live my life of luxury for 200 years. I'll be able to afford whatever new technology comes out for life extension. I think that's one of the reasons the 200-year project is possible, because of the fact what Bitcoin's going to do. Not because of what Bitcoin's done, but what Bitcoin's future is in this long-term play. I think that opens so many doors. The long-term play is why I think the 200-year life project has merit.
Yeah. Well, maybe to zoom in on that, like what is that for you? Again, I think compared to a traditional investor with their stocks, they're just looking at a certain company, right? Like what are they doing? What's their operational margin? Whatever. What is their idea for the future? Bitcoin is obviously should obviously be judged in a very different way. How do you see the difference between those two, and what is the big picture then, let's say, thesis for you to actually move beyond 5, 10, even 50, 100 years?
Well, to answer your question, I hodl. That's all I do is hodl. I'm not a trader. I'm not a buyer and seller. I don't look for ups and downs. You, like me, have been in this long enough that you've seen what's happening now many times in the price of Bitcoin. You're not sitting back going, oh my gosh, we're down 60%. I mean, that's really nothing compared to what you and I have seen over the last 10 years or so. Yeah. So the fact is, I hodl, I don't trade. I think in the long-term play of life longevity, I think as things come out that will help extend our lives, which I think with AI, that's going to be on steroids. I'll be in a position that I can get on that bandwagon or acquire whatever that tech is or whatever that is as soon as it comes out, instead of having to wait till it trickles down and takes 10 years to get to the ordinary person. Because at 71, my birthday was yesterday, at 71,
congrats.
I need to make this whole idea of living to 200 work. I need to be able to acquire these new technologies as soon as they come out. I can't afford to wait 10 years, to get something. I was telling my wife last night, we were talking about this and how people react. Most people laugh when I tell them I want to live to 200. And then if they have a comment, they go, I wouldn't want to have to work till I'm 200, or I wouldn't want to live to 200 because I don't want to be in a wheelchair and drooling and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't plan on doing that. I don't blame you. I wouldn't either. But we were talking last night, and I said, if I had told you just 5 years ago, you could take a shot every morning and lose maybe 100 pounds just from taking a shot, you'd have said you're crazy. But that's possible now. And now it's in pill form even. So things like that are going to start happening in the world of life longevity. Maybe the next one will come out for hair loss. Who knows what will come next, which I'm lucky I have a decent head of hair. But maybe the one after that will be for skin. Maybe the next one after that will be something else. But all these things, I believe, over the next 20, 30 years are going to start slowly rolling out. And that's going to cause a life longevity. And, it's life longevity. It's not like we're going to go from living an average of 86 years to 200. We'll probably go from an average of 86 to 96, 96 to 105, 105 to 130. But it's being able to get on the bandwagon as that tide starts rolling. You don't want to get on the bandwagon when your average lifespan's 86 and everybody else is already up to 120. Yeah. So that's my thing on that. But yeah, I just acquire Bitcoin because I know it's hard to spend Bitcoin, especially if you're using a long-term play like I am. Oh my gosh. I was invited to do something the other day. Well, we don't do things like we don't fly first class, because I'd have to probably cash out some Bitcoin. I live off of the income I have coming in from different things. That's what we live off of, but we never touch our stacks. I do things like that, but I don't spend the Bitcoin because it's too expensive. I was asked to do something I wanted to do. It costs, I don't know, $45,000, I think, to do it. And I thought it would be a great thing for us to do. And I started going, gosh, but in 10 years, that's going to be like we paid $450,000 for that. I just can't do that, because I'd had to cash in some Bitcoin to do that. Mm-hmm. So it really changed, and that's in general, isn't it? Doesn't Bitcoin change your whole perspective on spending money?
I would agree, but this example I think is very interesting, right? I don't know what it was for, obviously, but lately I have been thinking also. I recently had another podcast with Jeff Booth who talks about medium of exchange. You have to spend and replace and stuff like that.
He's a great guy.
I agree with you, right? Like you are not spending money on the ephemeral stuff anymore, like stuff you don't really value. Like it just forces you to really think.
If I do spend Bitcoin, I rebuy it.
Yeah.
If I have to pay for something in Bitcoin, I bought something the other day and the guy wanted Bitcoin, which is fine. And then I took the fiat I would have given him and bought more Bitcoin.
Yeah. When it comes to holding Bitcoin securely, peace of mind starts with architecture. OnRamp's multi-institution custody model distributes control access across 3 independent regulated key holders in a 2 of 3 multi-sig quorum. No single point of failure, no pooled or omnibus exposure, just segregated client-titled vaults. You retain full legal ownership while OnRamp coordinates security, compliance, and operational workflows behind the scenes. Multi-institution custody is the foundation for everything that OnRamp builds. Sound infrastructure that distributes counterparty risk and provides fault-tolerant resilience with clear audits and institutional controls. And now OnRamp is piloting flat, predictable pricing to make best-in-class Bitcoin custody and financial products more accessible than ever. Visit onrampbitcoin.com to learn more and sign up with code BRAM, that's BRAM, to receive $150 in Bitcoin after your first deposit. OnRamp, strength in many, simplicity in one. I think it's very interesting, your approach, right? Like a lot of people in their 70s would be focusing on preserving what they have, right? Whether it's in saving or their investments or whatever. But what you're sharing is that you're optimizing for a future that maybe isn't even there yet, right? But like you're saying, you want to be at the forefront, not really seeing, I think, Bitcoin as like a boomer retirement asset, but actually as something that you could use to live longer. Would you say that?
Well, I'm in a different situation.
Alone. Yeah,
I'm in a different situation too than a lot of people. My house is paid off. I have no bills. I don't have any bills except for gas, electricity, insurance. So I'm in a different situation than a lot of people. But that's because I'm a boomer too, and I bought all these assets, back in '86.
Yeah. That is interesting, right? That's something I wanted to talk with you about as well. A lot of people, they kind of say, boomers stole the future from millennials, etc. But I mean, you had a very successul entrepreneurial career also, right? So you did stuff, but
that's why I started calling myself the Bitcoin boomer. To be honest with you, at my office, I had a bunch of young people. We all were in one big room.
Yeah.
With the net, I always wanted to see everybody's monitor. So I could make sure they weren't spending all day on Facebook or MySpace back in the day. And we were doing something, and they were giving this lady, I was watching the video, and they were giving this lady a hard time. Or the school teacher went nuts because a kid called her, said, "Okay, boomer." And I was like, "What's the issue with that? I'm a boomer." And one of my guys we all were great friends, he was like 28 maybe. He goes, yeah. "Don't you know you boomers destroyed the world?" And I said, "What the hell are you talking about? We destroyed the world." And he goes, "Search boomers and some term." I searched, and there were all these videos about how we screwed everybody, how we ruined the world. And I was like I had nothing to do with that. So I'm going to own that name. So that's when I took the Bitcoin boomer as my handle. Yeah. Because I had nothing to do with that.
Well, I think it's also partially just a certain type of luck, right? I would say every generation has a certain challenges and certain type of luck. Obviously, your generation was lucky with regard to real estate, etc., right? But I don't want to fill it in for you, but I assume that while you were living in that time, you weren't really thinking, 40 years in the future and realizing what, would happen if you would take advantage of the opportunities you had in that, like in those days. So, I don't blame you, but I do think it's interesting. By the way, if you live to 200, you'll be using, twice as many resources as anyone would expect, right? So
maybe that'll really going to screw the country world.
Yeah. Well, maybe on that topic of kind of like this, generational theft, or at least, what millennials and younger, 28, is a bit more like Gen Z. Do you understand why they say that? And maybe also to
sure.
back into Bitcoin, understand. Right? Like, what does Bitcoin bring, you would say?
Yeah, I definitely understand. Oh my gosh, things just aren't like they were when I was a kid. Or when I was young, and of course everybody's indestructible when they're young. I was able to borrow my down payment to buy a house. Wow. I don't think you can do that now. I borrowed the money to buy a house because I didn't have the money for the down payment. Things were so easy back then. I really, to a degree, feel sorry for, and things are going to get so much worse for young people. Now that AI is out with what is going to happen in the world of AI. I know people talk about AI, but I don't think they really see what's going to happen here. I think in 2 or 3 years, the job market is just going to plummet, for anything. Anyone doing online designs or coding, all those jobs are going to go to hell, I think. For instance, when I do my show, I used to pay someone to do artwork for me. different things and different. I don't pay for any of that now. I just go on Grok and I say, draw me a picture of someone drinking hot coffee, as an example, where I would have bought that maybe from a stock library, before. So the young people are going to get screwed even more. So that's why, I guess that's why it's so important that they get on the Bitcoin train. The banks are trying to steal their Bitcoin. Banks are trying to steal their money. For boomers, here's the deal for boomers, that they are going to have a lifelong span, and all of them are living longer. I mean, as an average, they're taking care of themselves more. They're not drinking as much as they were. They don't smoke cigarettes as much as they were. But for those people like me, I think when I reach 75 in the United States, the law requires that I start pulling out like a percentage of my investments, cashing them in. I don't know what the purpose of that law is, and I'm not even sure of the exact amount or dates because I'm not there yet. I think my wife knows, but I think maybe at like 75, I got to start cashing in every year some. I don't have to do that with Bitcoin.
When you lived and were my age or a bit younger, the debasement wasn't that far yet, right? So in essence, I always say, fiat money is a brilliant invention for the people that live around the time where it gets introduced, basically, right? Because it's kind of like fake money. There's more units and you can just spend it right on whatever the price is of anything, just because the money is just going to be there, basically. And now the money is there too, conceptually, but the value dropped significantly.
Well, they have to print more and more of it, and especially if you're the world currency like the US dollar is, you have to print enough for the whole world to use. You have to print more, plus they have to pay more to pay their bills. Print more. That's the easiest way to pay that without cut. And the real problem with that, Bram, is okay. So we have some inflation from printing money. This is just my thoughts on it. I don't know where I got this. I probably just came up with this, but we're printing money, but we're getting to take advantage of the money. You know what I mean? Yeah. Most of it's going for stuff for Americans somehow, way, shape, or form into the economy, whether it's war and they're making more missiles and making more jobs, whatever it is. But other countries, they're just having their money debased if they're using US dollars. I mean, they aren't getting jack out of it for the most part. So the currency and, the rise of inflation and what we're going to see, even if it's not like every fiat currency that's ever come, and it goes to zero eventually. Even if we're a super geniuses country and we're able to expend it. An example I always use is a soft drink. A soft drink when I was, let's say like 10 years old, was 6 US cents, 6 cents. Wow. Now, 60 years later, it's like $3, I think, if you go into 7-Eleven and buy a soft drink. So I don't know what that percentage is, but if you took that same percentage, and if it doesn't increase inflation, if it just stays what it's been, and use that over the next 50 years, that $3 soft drink is going to be like $60. Yeah. I don't think people see what's coming.
Yeah. Well, this is exactly my point when I talk to millennials about this. Is it is very hard to look at the future, right? Like I agree, but this example that you gave, I always use the example of apples and bread, for example, right? Like also way more expensive, and we are arguably better at growing, harvesting apples and making bread, etc. Technology wise, right? But why? In your youth, it was probably also 15 cents or whatever, and now it's $5, right, or $4 for a bread. So
another good example.
Yeah, like looking at the future is difficult, but looking at the past, and there are people that actually lived in that example, like you just gave, right? I think gives you a direction for the future, and I think it is not. It doesn't paint a nice picture, and I think that combined with, you mentioned AI, right? Like taking over, the cognitive ability to be productive and earn, or be part in this economic market. I think that's going down. So kind of like these two things, looking towards the future, I think create the urgency for millennials and younger to start looking at
they're
other
probably going to have to come out with I thought this was crazy talk when I first heard about it a few years ago. Someone running for president in the United States was big on this universal basic income. I thought that was crazy, but now I kind of get the picture. I think I understand what it is, and I think that's going to have to become a reality. So many people are going to be out of work. If you have 30% of your population out of work, you're going to have problems on your hand. So you're going to have to use universal basic income. But none of those people are going to get rich. They're just going to exist. So we'll have a country of people who are existing, from one paycheck to another, which we have now, I guess. But they will have no chance to get rich, the majority of those people. And so Bitcoin, if you look at it in that aspect, Bitcoin, to me, I believe, could be their savior, where they could live at a better life than the average person who's receiving a check every month.
Yeah.
To me, my thoughts on that.
Well, obviously, I agree with that. I'm also not so sure about how this universal basic income would work if it's not like super controlled by the issuing, a government, as in, what you can spend it on and all these things. On the other side, I do think that AI and the future it brings is so, how do you say? Like, it's so different than anyone can imagine, right? Like I said, the productivity, I think, changes. It goes from doing dumb and repetitive and process type of work to hopefully being more creative and like using the machine and using the computer to apply that creativity that I think humans have to a certain degree that the machines won't have. I want to tie this back to your career. You started a wallpaper empire, as I read, with $10 in your pocket, like just from nothing.
Going door to door.
Amazing, yeah. If a 25-year-old today has $10 and a phone, what would be your number one advice today?
Gosh, I would probably, if I was young again and I had $10 and a phone and that's all I had, I would start going door to door and selling something. I mean, if you're comfortable talking to people, I almost think I could be dropped off in any town, and within 5-10 years, I would be able to support myself if I started with that $10. I mean, I would, I would start an online store to back up my door-to-door sales. But I'm an old door-to-door salesman. I love meeting people. I'm not scared to go to someone's door, the strange door, and knock on their door and talk to them. But I would build something online to help me market myself, and I would make my product sales door to door. I wouldn't be doing them online and competing with all the people online. When I moved into e-commerce back in '96, I started building my e-commerce site in '95, and no one would help me. None of my vendors would send me images or anything. They all said, that's crazy. People won't buy stuff on the internet. And I said, well, I would buy stuff. But once I did that, I started putting out all the stores in my local area, because they were all buying from me online and coming to my store because they found me online, and they weren't going online. But so now I think by that same thing, what I'm trying to get to is now there's so much competition online that the profit margins are destroyed by Amazon and people like that. So I think you'd have to actually get in front of people and use your abilities to sell and be a salesman, which I believe I am pretty good at that. So I would go door to door and have the website to back up basically my forms, or not even a website necessarily, but my forms. So because I wouldn't have money to go print receipts and contracts and sales material and stuff like that. So I would be creating everything I needed to make the sale: sales material, forms, contracts, whatever, testimonials. And then I would be out there knocking on the doors, and I don't know what I would be selling, but I'm sure there's something that everybody wants, Yeah.
I love the idea of everything old becomes new again, right? In a long enough time span.
It's like, I never thought I'd see bell-bottom pants again from the early 70s, but I see them all the time.
Funny, yeah. Well, maybe I think going back outside and having human connection is probably going to be very big in the age of AI, and maybe door-to-door sales was your answer to my next question. But I wanted to ask, what is a boomer skill you think has been completely lost in the digital age, but is actually a cheat code?
I think actually just being social and talking. I think going door to door would be real hard for a lot of people. But I think a lot of people just have a hard time getting out and talking and socializing. Kathy and I, my wife's Kathy, she's born in the same month I am. We're both 71. But we notice that a lot of times we'll go out to restaurants now, and the parents, for instance, let's say parents and their kids went out with another couple and their kids. And there's 4 kids and 4 adults. The 4 kids will all be on iPads playing games with headphones in, and the parents will be having a conversation. So the kids aren't picking up social skills. I mean, that's needed to be listening to the conversation, how people react, to feel comfortable with it. So, and then we walk in our neighborhood at night. We walk like 2 miles every night, and we probably don't ever see a kid, ever. And we have a lot of young families in the neighborhood. So I don't know if it's the fact that the parents are so fearful of their kids getting kidnapped that they don't let them go out and play. That's what my wife said. I believe they're all sitting in their house playing video games instead of out playing in the yard, discovering. We have a patch of woods by us. When we were kids, we had that kind of woods. We had a lot of cabins back there. We were camping out back there every Friday and Saturday. I've never seen a kid in the woods ever, which is crazy to me. So I think just social interaction is one of the things that boomers are real comfortable with that young people are not near as comfortable with.
Yeah. This is why I like talking to you and Bob and Larry, like people your age. There's some, I would almost say, like basic wisdom that just disappeared or something, right? Just like basic knowledge that just disappeared for some way. I mean, when I was younger, I also still played in the woods, so I think I did have that in my youth, and just coming home when it was dark already and etc. Just doing that. I don't know if I would let my kids do that today, and like why is an interesting question, and I'm not really sure about the answer, but it is kind of messed up when you look back.
And we faced all kinds of problems out in the woods. I mean, that we were able to handle and problem solve. We had a wild boar one time chase us up these trees. We were like in 3rd grade, and this wild boar came, and we're all hauling up these trees, and he stayed down there for half an hour. Crazy stuff happened to us, but we figured out how to handle it. Mm-hmm. And develop skills, problem-solving skills.
Yeah. When you look back and you see, I think when you get into Bitcoin, you also look at kind of like more macro. What are the developments? Kind of what phase are we in? You saw 1970s inflation, 1980s interest rates, 2008 market crash. I think currently, you're into Bitcoin. You see kind of like the current financial mess that we're in. What do you think, looking back, a lot of people are still dismissing that you think they actually should pay attention to? Like, what is the writing on the wall for you?
Well, I think there's so much writing on the wall. I think it's really hard. You must have your eyes closed if you don't see what's happening. I mean, for instance, as I said earlier, you can look at the lifespan and how every fiat currency that ever existed ended. I mean, that's pretty much writing on the wall. We can look at the inflation rate, what's happened since the Fed came out, in 1916 or whenever it was, or what happened in 1971 when we got off the gold standard. I had a discussion with somebody the other day who had never heard of proof of work. And I was talking about how we got off the gold standard. And that's not the problem, the gold standard. I studied so-and-so, and it's just, you don't need real money. It doesn't need to be backed by anything. And I was like, that's crazy talk, And he said, and at the end, I convinced them to look at what proof of work was, because he didn't even know what proof of work was, So I don't know. I think there's so many things that are obvious, like those two, that, I mean, my gosh, look what happened just in the last 4 years with the prices. And the United States government will say inflation is 2%, or 7%, or whatever percent they come up with at the time. But they only include things like television sets, for instance. They really never go up. When I was a kid, a television costs about $200. And a super good television today is about $200 or cheaper. Some things just don't go up that much, and they get really good. And that seems to be the kind of things they put into their inflation category. I don't think they put gas in there. And I don't think they put the price of homes in there. The things that are real important.
I don't think they put the basic stuff in there.
The things that have a lot of inflation that are going to make it look bad.
Yeah.
I think if President Trump was to say today, we're going to change how inflation is calculated to calculate it like we did in 1971 before we started manipulating it, so people will have a true picture. the rate would be so high, everybody would blame him for the rate being high, even though it was the same rate that was always there, but it would look higher because they would be calculating it properly. He'd probably run out on the rail, But he didn't change anything. He just gave you the true picture.
Yeah. Well,
and any president, I'm not saying Trump backing him up, he just happened to be the president. I'm just saying if any president did that, it would destroy their numbers, just what people would see every day and how the opposing side would play that. Inflation last year was 7%. Now it's 28%.
For my European friends that want to buy Bitcoin with ease, check out Relay. I've been a longtime fan and happy to partner up with what I think is the best Bitcoin-only platform for Europeans. They offer a super simple, beginner-friendly app with no distractions and no shitcoins. You can do a quick one-time smash buy or set up automatic purchases when you're stacking regularly. And here's the thing that matters most. Relay is 100% self-custody. Every set you hold is yours. Your keys, your coins. If you want to get started, download the app via my link below or in the description and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, at checkout to get 10% off your fees. A huge shout out to Relay for sponsoring the show. Now let's continue. When you are in the political class, you obviously have a benefit from being close or either in charge of money supply and growth and spending it on, whatever you think is important to spend it on. Like you don't get hit with the price inflation like general people, right? So that's I think it's obvious that
I don't spend as much. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I think also I'm a big believer that we should have get rid of the income tax. I'm not a big believer in income tax. I think you're penalizing people for working hard. If you want to tax people, tax them on what they spend. Rich people buy more stuff and would pay more taxes than poor people. And you could have a minimum they don't pay taxes. Sales they get, unless they bought $10,000 or $20,000 worth of stuff, they don't pay that national sales tax. I think you should be taxed on your expenditures, but that's a whole different subject.
And so when you look at your generation, I can imagine you've spent a lot of years trying to orange pill, like I'm trying, my generation, you're trying with your generation. When you, we touched upon, boomers got to a certain amount of wealth, partially because they were lucky, partially because there was just more opportunity, whatever brought up differently, whatever. What is the hardest truth that boomers, do you think, refuse to accept about Bitcoin?
That has any real value that you can spend it. A lot of people, what can you buy with Bitcoin? Like, that's really needed. But they'll have gold, and they're not buying anything with their gold, but they want to know what they can buy with Bitcoin. Another thing is the common things. I want to touch my money, and I go, well, how much cash do you actually touch right now? You have any money on you? No. So they have an issue with that too. But I think they still believe a lot of criminals are involved in Bitcoin. It's for criminals. I think things are getting better now with ETFs because they just go into ETFs and maybe put a little bit in that. But that kind of shows they really don't understand what Bitcoin is. But at least they're getting their toes wet, I guess. But I would say just in general, they all know what it is now. They know what Bitcoin is now. That's a big movement compared to when we started. You don't have to explain what is Bitcoin, blah, blah, blah. I mean, they've heard of it. So that's a big move. But they're really, one thing that they all do is when it drops like this happens every time. When it drops like this, they start, are you worried? Have you cashed in? They really don't get the picture and go, no, this is really nothing. I mean, the problem right now, and it's not a problem, that's the wrong way to state it. And, back in 2017, let's say I got to 19,000, 20,000, and it dropped back down to 4,000, and it got to 65,000 and it dropped to 17,000 years later. So those are big percentage drops, huge percentage drops. Now, yes, it's dropped again like it always does. And when it drops, we always have a higher low and then we go to a higher high. This happens. It's a regular thing. But so the dollar volume now is so high. The actual wealth value, instead of losing, let's say I'm going to just round out and say if you had 10 Bitcoin, just to use a number for easy math, if you had 10 Bitcoin In 2017, would you lose $130,000, let's say? But now, if you had 10 Bitcoin a year ago at 130,000, it's 60,000. Now you've lost $650,000. And for people who have multiples of Bitcoin higher than that, when you look at the Bitcoin drop, you go, oh my gosh, I've lost $1 million, or I've lost $5 million, or the big whales, I've lost $100 million. But then if they look at their percentage, this is really a minor drop. But that's hard to do with your brain. Your brain's going, oh my gosh, look how much money I've lost, instead of going, oh wow, this is just a normal drop and it's not that bad this time.
When you shared in the beginning about our experience, I realized last week that I've seen like 70+% drops. And although I have that experience under my belt, I have to be honest and say, like, I like green numbers better than
Someone told me the other day. Someone said to me the other day, goes, "Wow, I just love it. It's another buying opportunity." I said, "I've had plenty of buying opportunities. I'm ready for it to bust up."
But what is funny, like while we're recording, I'm trying to look up the price. So it was 66. Let me see. It was 65.4 an hour ago, and it's 69.6 now. So we had a $4,000 candle in an hour. And this is also why I like Bitcoin. It's just so entertaining now.
And there's two things to say with that. Number one, the reason you can make a lot of money off of Bitcoin is because it's so crazy up and down. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't crazy up and down, you would not see what we all want to see. And and also people need to think, we've already seen our first God candle. It moved 10,000 in a day. It's just a shame it was down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But we've seen one. And if you had told me even in 2020 that we'd be seeing $10,000 ups or downs, I'd be going, no, that's impossible. We won't see that in a day. So as I always tell my wife, when she's like saying something, because she's a believer, but she just doesn't have the faith I have, I guess. This is her first one she's watched. She hasn't watched the other drops, but now she does watch it. Yeah. And I told her, I said, okay, if you're having a heart attack now, what are you going to do when Bitcoin hits $5 million? And we lose millions in a day. Are you going to just have a stroke? I mean, this is a good learning experience for her.
It's the meme, right? Like Bitcoin crashed to 1 million. That's going to be the meme.
Or what I love is that meme with the two desks.
Yeah.
And one desk says Bitcoin at $100,000, and there's a whole line of people, and the other one says Bitcoin 65,000, and there's one guy buying Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And I have happened to me all the time. Like when it was 69 or whatever a few years back and it dropped to 17, I had 3 or 4 people said, I'm not buying, when it was like 50 or something. I think it's going to go to 7. I had a guy particularly at my house at a dinner table tell me that, a high wealth individual, and he said, I think it's going to go to 17. As soon as it gets in the 17s, I'm going to buy. I really truly believe that. I said, okay, good enough. I saw him like 6 months later and it had dropped to 17. And maybe it was a year later, and it was now up at 90. And I said, well, how much of that Bitcoin did you get at 17? Because I thought he was sincere, but I should have known. And he goes, oh, I didn't buy any. Because I hear that all the time from people. I think it's going to drop and they'll buy it. And then they don't, because they go, oh, I don't want to buy it now. It's dropping. It's doing what I wanted it to do.
Yeah. No, I think it's just a fascinating journey, and like this example, right? It is proof of work on all different fractals of Bitcoin. It's similar to this, right? Like someone can say, I don't really believe in it, but when it goes down, I'll buy it. Well, you have to put your money where your mouth is, and I really like that. Compared to, I would say the zero sum game fiat world where people can just yap and talk and pretend that they are true to their word, right? But I think everything in Bitcoin is proof of work, up and down, and I think that
whenever I talk to a high worth, I'm where I live is mostly high worth people. I'm at that level now. I'm in a secure neighborhood, and most of the people I hang out with are high worth people, and so that's just what happens when you get old if you've been successful. That wasn't always the case for me. Like you said, I started with $10. You know, I went to buy a tie for a job with my wife, and I bought a tie for $3, and she said, "Why don't you get a second one?" And I said, "I don't have enough money, to get a second tie."
Yeah.
So believe me, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. But a lot of people who I talk to, though, who are high worth people, I'll say, what do you do with your investments if you look in the morning and your investments are down 5%? Do you have a stroke, or do you panic, or would that affect your lifestyle? And they always say, no, I'm fine. It's going to go up sooner or later. I figure my lifestyle would be fine. I said, well, why not take 2% of that and throw it into Bitcoin? If it went to zero, I mean, if the worst thing it could possibly ever happened, you're still okay. But your upside is it could go to 1 million. So your downside is zero. Your upside is over 1 million. And it's an amount of money that's not going to affect you at all. But they never seemed, I thought that would be an easy sale, but they never seem to think that's a good move. Even though they agreed it wouldn't affect them if it went to zero, they just can't do it.
You mentioned, it's funny, by the way. Yeah, you mentioned people say, well, I cannot touch it. It's not real, right? And these people probably all have credit cards and were alive when the credit card was introduced, right?
And I remember when it came out.
And they took the plastic card, and instead of holding the cash, they started looking at numbers on the screen, and that is still money, right? I just think it's so interesting that argument in some way is so strong with a lot of people, right? Like it's not real if I cannot hold it, but you listen to digital music, you watch digital movies. You started paying with a plastic card that had, a digital connection from the terminal to the issuer and the processor, etc. So where does that come from? Because I think for boomers, that's probably a big bridge. That
is a big bridge.
The tangible part. Yeah,
I don't know why they can't put the two and two together. Maybe they're just repeating talking points that they've heard, because usually you hear people say that. Not usually, but I've heard many people who were opponents to Bitcoin on news channels say, "That's just made up internet money." You've heard that. It has no long-term value. You can't. What can you buy? I mean, there's so many talking points against it. So I really don't know why that is such a big thing, because it makes no sense. I mean, as you said, you can't touch your credit cards. I mean, that's not money. I held off from that a long time. I remember my kids were little. They go, "How come you will never use credit cards? Oh, you always use cash." I go, "I don't know. Credit cards aren't any good. I didn't know anything about money. I just knew I didn't like credit cards." But finally, I gave in, and now with the points, I use credit cards for everything I can. For the points, we just pay off the bill at the end of the month. It's a great tool if you pay off your bill if you don't overspend. Most people, I don't think, especially young people, know how to budget, and they get themselves in. And maybe because they're so in debt with school loans, they figure there's no big deal being in debt. They might as well have some more debt.
Yeah, well, I think it's probably debt. Like the nihilism that kind of gets put on them based on this whole debt-based society. And I think in the US it's probably worse than in Western Europe with. In the US, you have a good credit score when you have a lot of debt.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't know. It just makes
you don't have any debt. You can't get any more debt.
Yeah. So this is really the European mind cannot comprehend what that even what that even means.
We had actually. I think we have. I don't know, four American Express accounts, and it's funny. Two of them that we hardly use lowered the amount of credit we have with them. It went from
it's crazy
one high dollar amount to a moderate amount because we weren't using it enough.
Yeah.
Not because anything had changed.
Yeah.
Not because there was anything negative. We just weren't using their card enough, so they lowered it.
Yeah. So they're incentivizing people to take on this debt, right? And participate in this machine. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but by the way, I don't even know its name, but I watched this guy on YouTube who just interviews people about their financial life, but all these people are really in debt or they have just messed up.
I have seen him. He goes over their finances with them.
Yeah. And
there
was one woman who said, "I thought Apple Apple Pay wasn't real money or something, and she used Apple Pay in combination with her credit card, and she had like, I don't know, 8 or 10K in debt or something. And like it is good content because it's funny. Like you can laugh about how dumb this person is with their money. But I think on the other side, the fact that people don't even understand money, that it's so easy to fall into this trap of debt, and you're forced, right? Like you just mentioned. What is your take on that? Maybe also when you look back at, let's say, when you were like mid 30s, also crazy stuff happened. Like you said, you got the down payment was also a loan, right, on the house. So that's also kind of interesting. But how have you seen that change? Because
the loan on the house was a 30-day balloon note,
Okay.
So it was so creative that it's mind-boggling to us now when Kathy and I talk about it, where we got the money to pay for the loan was crazy.
Yeah.
And on that show you mentioned first, I noticed a lot of those people on that show justify their being in debt.
Mm-hmm.
It's either the president's fault, or it's the school system's fault, or it's the bank's fault for not representing. It's never really their fault, most of them. I just don't think they understand basic money, which I think is another thing that we mentioned earlier falls into play. Bitcoin causes you, not if you buy, Bitcoin through BlackRock or something, a Bitcoin ETF, but if you get into Bitcoin, and you really get into Bitcoin, you go down this rabbit hole and you start understanding what money is. And you learn about money. And that's the thing. We don't teach kids about money in school anymore. Most kids get out of school and they don't know how to balance a bank book. Not that they have necessarily a checkbook, not that they have checkbooks, but online, they don't know how to bank. They just know how to spend. I think that's the main problem, is that people just don't know what they're doing anymore with money. They don't understand what money is. They don't understand how to use money. They don't understand how to use money for their own good, instead of like paying these huge interest rates. I mean, but then the kind of way the United States is, we don't seem to understand money as a country, or how to balance our bank book, or how to not pay these huge interest rates. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's just the American way.
Yeah. Interesting. What I really like about Bitcoin, and like I told you before we started, your friend Bob Burnett was my main inspiration to start this podcast. So I think there's not that many collaborations between boomers and millennials, or like younger people. But what I see in Bitcoin is that people get into Bitcoin from all age ranges, from all backgrounds, from all these types of different geographies and life stories and whatever. And so where my question comes from is that I think there is already a lot of collaboration between, younger and older generation, which I think is special in a way that it brings people together. So it was just more a hypothetical question. Like, what could we do, older and younger generations working together?
Well, before I go into that, I do want to give you an example of something that you're talking about here. You're talking about, you don't see a lot of millennials and boomers working together. And I think this has something to do with it, with the example I'm going to give you. I was at a conference, I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, for YouTube maybe. A friend of mine started a YouTube conference and said, "Hey, come to my conference. I'd like you to come." So I went, and I was standing around talking to me and this older woman, my age, and the rest of them were young kids. And this kid says to me, he goes, "I think it's really great that someone your age wants to learn this stuff," whatever it was that we were at the conference. I said, "What?" And he goes, "Well, yeah, you're old and you're trying to learn this stuff, young people stuff." And I go, "That's crazy." And I said to the woman, I said, "Can you believe what he's saying?" And she's like, "Yeah, that's why I'm here. I'm old and I want to learn young stuff." I was like, "Oh my gosh, you're exactly who he's talking to." I said, "Kid, I've been doing this since before you were born." So, I mean, I was kind of taken back, but I think that's the point I'm trying to make is I think that's the thought on a lot of millennials, that all boomers are like the lady who was standing next to me. They have no idea what's going on, online, and like I said, I started my first e-commerce site and it went live in 96, so, I mean, I was one of the first 50 podcasters on the planet. I bought Bitcoin pretty early. Now, when you look in the picture of things, so some of us boomers are able to see things, before they happen or know where things are going. Not all of us boomers are out of it. I think that's a problem with a lot of young people is they group all boomers together, that they're all out of it. Old people, like their dads and moms might be, and maybe their dads and moms are out of it. Maybe he just comes home and sits on the couch and farts and smokes a cigar and watches TV all night. And that's all he does. I don't know. That's what my dad did. I mean, except smoke cigarettes. So maybe that's the example they're raised up with. And they think all boomers are like their dad.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a very interesting answer, actually. Also, again, I think it is just interesting to talk with someone who is older. I have to admit, I don't really do that a lot, but you had, and this is the last part I wanted to talk about with you, because you've done so many things. You are even, like you mentioned, you were a very early podcaster, right? You are actually in the Podcasting Hall of Fame, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
You are also organized a very big podcast conference. Now you're organizing a big Bitcoin conference. You saw the birth of, let's call it new media, right? Like just people talking to each other over the internet in a decentralized way. I think next to also blogging, but I think this was even more revolutionary, right? Like just sharing more ideas, new ideas from all sorts of different backgrounds, kind of like piercing through this veil of just mainstream media. How would you compare that experience and how you saw that develop to, Bitcoin as being something
that's
that is
really another good question, and I hate to say that term because I think that's a term people just throw out there to give them time to think. So I usually don't say that, but that's a good question that I have a good answer for. On our podcasting page, my podcast website was in Time Magazine in '96, I think. Or no, in 2006 is one of the 50 coolest websites in the world, and it was the beginning of social media as we know it today. MySpace was out, and we had created interactive chat rooms in there and message boards, and it was really, really very active. And still to this day, if I go to a podcasting event, which is very few and far between, I'll have someone who is a well-known podcaster now who will go, I learned everything about podcasting from your website, from the interactions in the community. And I just want to let you know, I would not be where I am today if it wasn't. My site was called Podcast Pickle. I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for Podcast Pickle. And that always makes me feel great. But I think that comparison, I think there are three of them I'm going to throw in here. Starting e-commerce, podcasting, and Bitcoin. All three of those communities, when e-commerce started, it was really kind of a community to a degree. We would get, if we put up products for our wallpaper store, we had the first wallpaper website on the net. If we put up products, tons of people would email us. They would take the time, customers, to email us and go, hey, I just want to let you know, on the page under green wallpapers, the fifth wallpaper, the doll wallpaper, you misspelled, you forgot an L in the word doll in the description. We were getting emails like that all the time, people just helping us out to say, hey, I went through your whole thing here. Here's how you could change this and make it better if you did this. So it was amazing. Same thing happened in podcasting. Everybody was helping everybody out to begin with. It was a really small niche to begin with. Most of the first podcasters were on Apple computers because Apple had GarageBand. So they automatically had the software they needed to do a podcast, where with a PC, you had to go get software. So right off the bat, most of them were Apple computer people. And you were kind of on a different brainwave anyway back then if you had an Apple versus a PC. And they were all helping each other out. That was some crazy times, but they were a lot like the first internet, and Bitcoiners are the same way. A Bitcoiner, like this conversation here we're having, or any conversation we have, to me, a Bitcoiner is like I'm going to say, I'm not knocking religions, but I'm going to say it's like a Jehovah's Witness. Jehovah's Witnesses believe, and I'm not a pro at this, but a certain amount of people are going to go to heaven. There's a limited number that can go. I know they have some reason they came up with that number. So they don't go around door to door talking you into trying to convince you to be saved and see God because they think they're going to go to heaven. Because they know there's a limited amount. And I'm sure they realize whatever that amount is, in the last 2,000 years, there have been people more holier than them that are going to get in ahead of them. They're going to have to do a heck of a lot of work to pass all those people. But they're doing it because they want to help those people out and stuff like that. And they think it's going to be good for them to know these rules in the Bibles and things like that. Bitcoiners are just like that. They're not trying to get you to buy Bitcoin because you buying $100 or $1,000, even $100,000 worth of Bitcoin is going to make their stack go up. I mean, they're smart enough to know Bitcoin's not going up because you bought $100 worth. They're doing it because they sincerely think it would be better for you to have Bitcoin than to be stuck with just fiat, and they're trying to help you. So I really believe there are a lot of similarities between Bitcoiners and religious people. They're both trying to help you out and help you to do better on your own status. So that's just something I came up with too. I don't know. Someone else may have come up with that, and I may have seen it and didn't know it. But I talked to a friend of mine who's a Jehovah's Witness. That's why I use that scenario, because they even do more outreach than many other religions. And they even have more reason to me to think that it's not for personal gain, since there's a limited amount of people they think can go to heaven. And that's the way Bitcoiners are.
Yeah, what I really love is that when you say to someone, like, I honestly feel altruistic in my intention and applying my creativity and energy to this, right? Telling more people about Bitcoin and why Bitcoin exists and the problem they have today, etc. Some people will be interested. It will pique their interest when they hear that, and other people will say, but yeah, you wouldn't talk about Bitcoin if you didn't own Bitcoin. And then, my reply always is, well, it would be very weird if I would be talking about Bitcoin and not own Bitcoin, right? Like that would probably be worse than what I'm doing right now.
I've had people say to me after I explain, they asked me what was Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And it'd be someone I know, so I'd give them the time, the time they deserved as a friend. And after I explained Bitcoin, 15, 20 minutes talking to them, they go, so what do you get out of this? And I'm going,
yeah.
But, they think I'm like, it's a multi-marketing thing or something.
Yeah.
Going, wow, I did a pretty poor job, I guess, explaining it.
Well, it's funny if you then just realize, like, I don't really care if you buy it or not, right? I always like that kind of throws people.
Hey, the other thing that lets you know you did a bad job explaining is when you get through explaining and you say to yourself, that was a good explanation. And they go, do you have one on you? Oh, man, I did a bad job.
That's funny.
That's the other one. When they say that, you've done a bad job explaining Bitcoin.
That's funny, yeah. All right, I want to ask you two questions to wrap up.
Yeah.
When you make it, I don't want to say if, I want to say when you make it to 200, what is the one relic of the 2000s or 2020s besides Bitcoin that you would want to carry with you?
Well, that was a good way of stating it when I make it, because I truly believe that. But, for that purpose, it's a no-lose game for me. You know what I mean? If I only make it to 140, well, whoop-de-doo. And people go, you didn't make it 150, I'd be dead. So I could care less what they say. Yeah. But I had an extra, 40 years out of the deal. So what would be one of the things I'd take with me? My wife, I'd take her with me. So because we're doing this as a team. After 44 years of being married, I don't know what I would do if I didn't have her around. It would definitely change my fundamental feelings on everything. So her.
Awesome. All right, last question, and I ask everyone the same question, which is, what is a core belief that you will never let go of?
That good things happen to good people. If you do people right, it comes around. What goes around comes around. Or you can call it karma, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But if you just are a good person and do people right, it comes around more often than not. So I truly believe that. I truly believe, you need to treat everybody with respect. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care what race you are. I don't care what political party you are. Everybody is still a person and they need to be treated with respect. And I see that's one of the things that I feel is really kind of sad today is I see so many divisions. I feel everything was better when I was in high school. Race relations were better, religious relations were better, political relations were better. It's just amazing to me how separated we are. And that's one thing I'd like to see change. I don't know if that's necessarily the question. I might have wandered off there again, but that's the thing that needs to be fixed.
I love it. Well, I think that's the goal, right? Just to share our positive energy and interest and hopefully inspire other people.
Yeah,
so
it's kind of like, I don't hate shitcoiners. You know what I mean? I don't care for shitcoins, but I don't hate them. I don't dislike them. They're still people. I'll still talk to them when I see them. I'm just not going to become one.
All right. I think that's a great ender. Well, Gary, I want to thank you so much for anyone who wants to go to your Bitcoin conference. By the way, it's April 9 to 12 in Fort Worth, Texas. It's called BitBlockBoom.
This is going to be a great event. This is our 9th year with the longest running Bitcoin conference that there is. Maybe the longest running any kind of digital currency conference for all I know. And this year, every year, if I can just have a minute here, every year we've done this conference, like I told you, in 2018 and 19, I had more people from the Netherlands than I had from Dallas, even though it was in Dallas. So I've always had a lot of people come, and I think they come to Texas and they're expecting to see tumbleweeds and cowboy hats and horses. But I've always had it in metropolis areas like in Dallas or Austin, Dallas, North Dallas. This year, we're hosting it in Fort Worth, Texas, which is considered Cowtown. And I mean, there's a cattle drive that goes down to place. A Thursday night, we have a party, dinner at a rodeo. I mean, this is going to be what everybody, for the first time at BitBlockBoom, what everybody expects to see when they get here. People just walking down the street in cowboy boots and hats, and it's not an outfit; it's what they wear every day. You know what I mean? So, awesome. So I think people are going to really be in kind of shock when they come. People from Europe and Australia. We usually have a large contingency from Australia, but it's check out BitBlockBoom.com. Love to see you there. I'll give you a discount code if you use the code Gary. I don't know what the discount that gives off, but I think it's pretty good. So
awesome.
Then go to that.
All right. Well, thanks again for your time and sharing your knowledge, and I appreciate it and hope to stay in touch. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show. I enjoyed it completely.
Cheers. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, if you want to help me shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, please like this video and subscribe to stay connected. I hope to see you for the next episode. Bye.